Should be careful with my language given this topic, but yeah. Anyway, yeah. Well, so I guess I should get serious for a moment, but I would like to welcome you all also to the Faculty of Law. And many of you would know that behind us is the new wing. It's the Indigenous wing of the law school. And it's a great reminder of where we are. It's a great reminder of the history of these lands and that we are here on the lands of the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples. And also, it's a great reminder of the historical ties of Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples, the historical ties to these lands. So I want to begin with that and encourage you, if you haven't already done so. So most of you would have come through the lobby and sort of seen a little bit of the new wing, but it's really a spectacular, spectacular display and tribute to Indigenous architecture as well. And so please take some time, if you haven't already, to take a walk through the building after the session. So back to CAPI and CSRS and CFGS. Again, we're coming together. We do this not as often as I'd like, so I hope we will be able to take some inspiration. Research centers are important players. They're not the big faculties, so you could think of us as kind of a middle power alliance. And we're working together to serve the public good. So with that, please enjoy the session, and I'll hand it over to Rachel for full introduction.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased to see so many folks here today for our Harold Coward India Research Fellowship lecture. This fellowship recognizes the academic contributions of Professor Harold Coward, a prominent Canadian scholar of Hinduism, Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, and founding director of the Centre for Studies in Religion and Society. The purpose of the fellowship is to provide a visiting scholar with a stimulating academic environment conducive to research and writing, and to strengthen academic partnerships between the University of Victoria and our colleagues in India. The fellowship also aims to enrich the scholarly communities housed at the CSRS, CFGS, and CAPI by providing each community with opportunities to engage with the visiting scholars' research. Now, over the years since the foundation of the Harold Coward Fellowship in 2012-2013, our three centers have been enriched by the collegiality and research of scholars such as Rinku Lamba, who worked on a project on Bhakti and the shaping of social imaginaries in colonial India, Bindu Manil Menon, who looked at transnational religious publics, migration, visual culture, and Jamaat Ismaili in South Asia and the Middle East, and Ramesh Berry, whose project for the Harold Coward Fellowship was querying the religious, the Martha, caste, and the contemporary. And now it is my pleasure to introduce this year's Harold Coward India Research Fellow, Shubham Arora. A Sanskritist by training and an intellectual historian in the making, Shubham was born and raised in India and moved to Canada in 2018 to pursue graduate studies. He is now an advanced PhD candidate in the Department of Asian Studies at UBC, where he is in the final stages of writing his dissertation on Sanskrit erotics, or the Kamasastra. Sorry, I'm working on my Sanskrit, buddy. A tradition of theoretical and technical treatises written between 300 and 1300 CE. His dissertation explores how, on par with other domains of knowledge production in pre-modern South Asia, this tradition did more than just catalog sexual desire and pleasure. It conceptualized the idea of pleasure, classified sexualities, and prescribed effective practices to cultivate bodily and aesthetic sensibilities. His research interests more broadly include South Asian religions, Sanskrit literature, intellectual history, and critical approaches to gender and sexuality, with particular attention to performance and oral traditions. Standing at the crossroads of intellectual history, global studies, and sexualities in Asia and the Pacific region, Shubham works on the ways sexuality is managed, mobilized, and commodified, historically and in the contemporary global contexts, making him an ideal Harold Coward India Research Fellow with clear connections to the CSRS, CFGS, and CAPI. Shubham brings embodied scholarship to the three centers as well. Trained in Kathak, he also engages in embodied practice as a mode of scholarly inquiry and has performed beautiful renditions of Indian stories and texts in our Coffee Talk space. He can also be found, I am told, always happily, reading and translating Sanskrit poetry and yoga texts, whether on his own or in reading groups at the center. Our center communities have all been enriched by Shubham's presence this semester, and I'm pleased to be able to welcome him here today to share some of his excellent scholarship with all of you. So please join me in welcoming Shubham.
The day has come. I'm so surprised to see you at 10:30 in the morning for this obscure topic, as Victor said. Thank you so much, Victor. I really appreciate it. Rachel, thank you so much. You made me emotional. I don't think I can ever do justice to that introduction. So thank you so much for welcoming me to your life, to University of Victoria, to CSRS, to CAPI, to CFGS. And honestly, it's my honor to be here at the University of Victoria as the Harold Coward India Research Fellow. Sorry. Professor Harold Coward, I know you're not here, but I think you're on Zoom or you'll watch this later. This short message is for you. So when I told my mother last year that I received this Harold Coward India Research Fellowship and I'll be back in University of Victoria, this time jointly affiliated by 3 centers, and she was all excited. She kudos me and she was like, "Great job, baby." And I'll be my mama's baby always. Right. And we were off the call. Perfect. And then I received 2 screenshots from her. Guess what? She quickly Googled who is Harold Coward, what his legacy is, how many books he has written. And like, I couldn't even think of that she's so quick and so tech savvy. Mothers are amazing. Nothing to do with this topic. So I received another call immediately and she said, did you see my screenshots? I was like, yeah, I just saw your screenshots and thanks for sharing it with me. It was Wikipedia page, his department profile, it's CSRS's page. And she asked me, do you know what it means? I was like, yeah, I'm getting a fellowship there. And she said, it's not just a fellowship. It's a legacy you are going to be part of. See all his academic contribution. It's the legacy you are going to be part of. And it's not just only a fellowship, it's a responsibility, it's a commitment. So make sure you know this before you join that. And this day, I am standing here with all responsibility and commitment with me in my heart. Thanks, Mom, and thanks, Professor Harold Coward, that for the rest of my life, I'll be known with your name, through your name, as Harold Coward India Research Fellow. It's not just a title in my CV. It's going to be an honor that I'll cherish forever for my life. So thank you. With this, I also thank all the 3 centers, CSRS, CFGS, and CAPI, for inviting me and for their lovely teams, Rachel, Paul, Todd, Scott, Jessica, Victor, Noel, Katie, Cynthia, Jody, Oliver, who even didn't know me back then, but they were so enthusiastic to have me here. That means a lot to me. So thank you so much. Thank you for making this lecture possible. Now let's talk the business. The affair. Sexual pleasure. Sexual pleasure and matters here. Awesome. Feel free to laugh if you want to laugh. Feel free to object if you want to object. It's just a flow that I'm walking you through. I'm taking you on this journey of sexual pleasure without actual sexual pleasure. So sexual pleasure, one of the most intimate, most private dimensions of human experience, of human existence. How it can be complete without telling a story. It's a clean story, trust me. I'm taking you back in 2018 before coming to Canada to pursue my PhD. I'm in India. I'm in Kurukshetra University, where I did my bachelor's in technology. I'm a computer science by engineer. What computer scientists know about pleasure? Hell, nothing. So I'm in Kurukshetra University's central library in philosophy and religion section, and I stumble across this senior renowned giant professor known in Indian scholarship. And he is at the University of Kurukshetra University. in Sanskrit and Indology studies. We stumble across each other and namaste, namaste, and we started chatting, just impromptu chatting. It's happened. And he was telling me about his work. He's asking me about my work. He's like, beto, sit down. And we sat on the floor in the library and we were chatting for 3 hours. Towards the end, around 2.5 hours, he asked me, what do you do? I just finished my master's in Buddhist studies, philosophy and comparative religions from Nalanda University. Nalanda, Rajgir. Yes, from that Rajgir. So what are your future plans? Because master alone doesn't pay your bills. The career. I was like, I'm going to pursue my PhD in University of British Columbia. I'm going to Canada in 2018, August 2018. And he was like, that's amazing. He literally gave a pat on me because he knows that I'm doing Sanskrit literature. Then he asked me, curiosity, that what genre of Sanskrit literature are you going to study? In my all excitement, I said, Kama Shastra, Sanskrit erotics. There was a certain discomfort I could see on his face, and there was a brief pause, an awkward silence. And he said, Kama Shastra, Sanskrit erotics. What's there to study in that? I mean, if you want to take Sanskrit literature seriously, study ethics, study grammar, study philosophy. These are the subjects worth studying. What are you studying? You are like, going for what? My heart was like beating. I was like, why did I say anything? Any which way. I'm smiling, I'm nodding because I'm the obedient. I'm known for my obedience, trust me. And inside, my internal voice is screaming at me and it's saying, Shubham, sexual pleasure is the only subject worth studying. Study its grammar. Study the ethics of pleasure. Study the grammar of pleasure. Study the philosophy of pleasure, because these are the subjects worth studying, because these make you human. I smiled there, I left, and here I am. That's the day, and here you are, all excited to listen to this one obscure topic of sexual pleasure. It tells me so much about you too. Like as if you waited your entire life for this one lecture, and you'll be complete now. The climax. I can see laughter here. I can see some discomfort back in my past. And one of the major reasons for this range of reaction is that the conversations about the topic are never neutral. Some forms of talking about sexual pleasure exoticize it, some normalize it, some stigmatize it, or even some scandalize it. Let me ask you a very simple question, and it's not a rhetorical question. Feel free to answer. As I said in the beginning, just jump in. When you hear or when you read words like sexual pleasure, erotics, South Asia, or if I may add, Sanskrit, India, what comes to mind? Kama Sutra. Anybody else? Tantra? Khajuraho. Orientalism. Edward Said is right here. You raise your hand? Okay. So yeah, most of like people here, you would think of the Kama Sutra, Tantra, Tantric sex, the sculptures on Khajuraho. And this is the understanding we come up with. This is how we understand the Kama Sutra. And it's understandable why, because in the global popular imagination, the Kama Sutra has been exoticized as a specimen of ancient Indian erotica shaped by colonial era Orientalist fantasies, as you mentioned, Paul. Thank you. So Kama Sutra, the Hindu art of love illustrated, a distillation of all that the East learned in centuries about love making. There are many wives in this country being Britain that time, who would be happier if their husbands had been brought up on some of the precepts of the Kama Sutra. The second book, Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana, the long suppressed Oriental manual on the art and techniques of love. And in addition to that, there are pop cultural interpretations, such as the emergence of Japanese Kama Sutra manga in the late 20th century, which have since circulated internationally. And if you are in Amsterdam walking through the red light district, you might come across this Kama Sutra Indian restaurant there. as I was in 2025, I have a regret. I didn't go in. I didn't see their menu. I didn't taste their food. I wanted to see what are they serving, but regrets are regrets. If you happen to be there in Amsterdam, do check out this restaurant. Please let me know so that I can add another slide on another picture here, and I'll give you credits. Moving on, the Kama Sutra is frequently conflated with the physical practices of yoga as well as with Tantra, which is another deeply misunderstood school of thought in pre-modern South Asia. And the Kama Sutra is repackaged as Tantric sex, sold in glossy self-help book, excessively ornamented with titillating paintings, photographs, and images of sculptures depicting intimate sexual position. Kama Sutra and Tantric sex transform your sexual life, awake the ultimate pleasure with illustrated sex position, spicy ideas, and sex games. And there is more to it. In the modern global marketplace, pleasure is increasingly commodified through a manufactured sense of pleasure deficit, casting pleasure as something to be acquired, something to be enhanced, something to be optimized or normalized in your bodies. This narrative, in turn, fuels markets for sexual accoutrements, high-end wellness retreats, digital intimacy dating apps, and sexual spiritual tourism, often oriented toward destinations in global South, including Mexico, South, and Southeast Asia. Believe it or not, sex tourism is a multi-billion-dollar industry, from the taxi drivers to the brothel landlord, and so on and so forth. These readings, these interpretations of the Kama Sutra are sustained and intensified by forces of counterculture, neoliberalism, and consumer capitalism. I don't need to go in details on that. At the same time, in its local context, that is to say in India, the Kama Sutra has been reimagined as an emblem of ancient Indian science on the subject of sex, framed as Indian sexology to prove to the West the scientific temperament of Eastern knowledge systems, which is mobilized within an anti-colonial and nationalist project seeking to reclaim newly born India's intellectual past. The Kama Sutra has also been spiritualized, that is to say, sex is reinterpreted as a vehicle for liberation, or as this book edited by Mulkraj Anand says, as a means, the sacred means of salvation itself. That's a peculiar word here, salvation. Paradoxically, however, in post-independence India, the Kama Sutra and in its various representations, textual and visual alike, have also faced repeated censorship as pornography caught between state-sanctioned obscenity laws, moral anxiety, and religious political ideologies. Beyond the many forces shaping the ideas around Kama Sutra, both globally and locally, the text has also become a trendy presence on social media. There are sex educators, influencers, content creators, mythologists. They are interpreting its content for contemporary audiences like us. In these spaces, it is often romanticized or glamorized as a cultural commodity, while at other times treated humorously or reduced to stereotypes about exotic sexuality. So amidst all these different ideas about the Kama Sutra, sometimes conflicting, sometimes misleading, we might ask one simple question. Where is the Kama Sutra in all of this? Or what is the Kama Sutra in all of this? Let me be clear. When I'm asking these questions, I'm not interested in questioning the authenticity or appropriateness of these contemporary narratives, these global and local understandings, or in asking what the Kama Sutra means for us today. But I would certainly clarify that Kama Sutra is not pornography. That's a myth, or rather I should say that's a blunder. When I ask, where is the Kama Sutra? I actually mean, let's get together, let's read the text, and let's understand it for its own sake. And I said the text, I should say in plural, texts on erotics, and understand them in their own way. I'm talking about a complex intellectual landscape here, and none of the representations actually and accurately reflect the magnitude of the intellectual labor invested in these texts that belong to this pre-modern tradition of theorizing pleasure in South Asia. Modern scholarship on erotics has evolved with serious interest in philology, history, and critical theory. And my work, which is standing at the intersection of intellectual history, South Asian religions and literature, and sexuality studies, proposes a fourth yet unexplored course through the world of erotics by asking a different set of questions. How did pre-modern South Asian thinkers, these authors of these texts, conceptualize body, pleasure, desire, intimacy, and emotion, more broadly the domain of erotics, in their own historical and intellectual worlds? And most importantly, why did they theorize the way that they did? If we are talking about gender and sexuality today in this contemporary world, we have certain reasons, certain motives, certain intentions. Why back in 4th century, somebody was sitting probably under the tree or peeking into somebody's bedroom and they're theorizing the text? Why? And what are they writing? What are they trying to achieve with that? Aren't people do sex all the time? So my focus is on these thinkers of erotics. Having said that, I'm not a psychoanalyst, so I'm not studying a psychoanalysis, not doing a psychoanalysis of these authors. Rather, as I extensively discuss in my dissertation, for these thinkers, pleasure is a thought. It is a site of knowledge production, vidyasthanam. I read these texts, in plural again, as engaged in dialogues that constitute a centuries-long tradition concerned with the principles, limits, and possibilities of pleasure. And by situating their dialogue historically, I further demonstrate that erotics did not exist as an isolated field of knowledge. Rather, these authors actively participated in the intellectual and cultural tradition around them, and in doing so, they self-reflexively reshaped the very tradition of erotics. And this is what I call an intellectual history of pleasure. So my work, An Intellectual History of Pleasure, therefore creates space for pleasure as a serious subject of inquiry and demonstrates that these theorists, these thinkers and their texts belong to a scholastic tradition that theorize the conditions and practices conducive to attaining pleasure. And B, it disorients prevailing notions that fetishizes Asian cultures as sites of desire. It's good to chuckle, it's good to laugh, but we need to see what's underneath that too. What the text is saying for itself, to do justice to these texts and their intellectual labor. Let me introduce you to the textual genre. Now it's a Sanskrit lesson, my friend. Kama Shastra. So the term comprises two Sanskrit terms, Kama, which means pleasure, and Shastra, which means a theoretical system or a body of knowledge. So when we put them together, Kama Shastra, it represents an ideological authoritative system that conceptualizes sexual desire, taxonomizes sex and sexuality, codifies rules of interpersonal amorous behavior, and prescribes a wide range of arts and accoutrements and affective practices that cultivate aesthetic refinement and social sensibilities for the pursuit of pleasure. To clarify, this is not a religious text or a ritual manual, unless you consider pleasure as a religion in itself. It's a normative text, or it's a normative genre. Loosely, we can say that Kama Shastra texts are injunctions or manuals of sexual techniques, but they're not just manuals of techniques. They're concerned with the nature, ethics, and aesthetics of bodies and pleasure. And let me give you an example here. For example, the Kama Sutra defines Kama, which we just translated as pleasure, as the harmonious engagement of ears, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose with their respective sense objects, all regulated by the mind, which is itself connected to the self. Further, through a particular kind of touch, it leads to a fruitful sensory experience, which is filled with a delight arising from erotic arousal, and that is the highest form of pleasure. In our day-to-day language, we can say climax or orgasm. But again, Kama is not just sex. It's a model of how human senses, human faculties function. And to misread these texts as mere manuals of sex is to overlook an entire intellectual, philosophical tradition devoted to analyzing and theorizing human desire and sexuality. In making this argument here, standing in front of you, I also want to acknowledge that my intention is not to romanticize the intellectual labor that goes in these texts at the same time. I'm very careful of my positionality when I'm presenting them or advocating for them. In the pre-modern Sanskrit knowledge system, this tradition stood alongside other branches of intellectual pursuit, such as law, grammar, logic, politics, medicine, astrology, metaphysics, and you name it. The tradition of Sanskrit erotic spans an extraordinary length of time. The earliest available text is the Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana, which I translate as aphorism of pleasure here, which was composed around the 4th century of the Common Era. But there were texts prior to the Kama Sutra which haven't survived. Over the centuries, authors continued to write about pleasure, revise and theorize erotics, and they constituted a tradition that extended well into the 20th century. To be clear, the Kama Shastra is a tradition or genre, and the Kama Sutra is only one text, one voice, one note in that genre. So Kama Shastra is the tradition, and Kama Sutra is one text in that tradition. Although the Kama Sutra is overhyped, as we saw in the beginning, there are many, many other important texts that also deserve our attention. So for my doctoral research, which I am finishing soon, I promise to myself, I focus on 4 early Sanskrit works. I begin with the Kama Sutra because that's the earliest available text, and then turn to 3 medieval texts, Padma Shris, Kakukas, and Hariharas. Geographically, these authors were located in different regions of the Indian subcontinent. For example, Vatsyayana in Pataliputra, which we can say is present-day Bihar, Padma Shri in present-day Nepal, Kukuka in present-day Odisha, Bengal, Assam region, and Harihara most likely in South India and contemporary Andhra Pradesh or Karnataka region. A crucial caveat there is that, and I must acknowledge that most likely all these men that this tradition have, or the authors in this tradition, they're most likely men. So my work would be an intellectual history of men's theorization of pleasure, and that's one side of the story, I would say. But they were in conversation with the courtesans of their time and queer and third gender people there. So they're also including their pleasure. Having said that, a feminist and queer reading of these texts will provide more insights into the intellectual history of pleasure. Given the time constraints, as if all the time I can take, but given the time constraints, I will briefly discuss Harihara's intervention in his The Lamp That Illuminate a Passion. So in my close reading of his text, I show how Harihara rethinks erotics by adapting categories, conventions from erotics and from parallel traditions of poetics, South Indian vernacular poetry, and yoga. This is how I visualize Harihara's intertextual world, that is to say, the network of texts and traditions with whom Harihara was in conversation. So within the domain of erotics, Harihara is borrowing from Kukuka's work, which was an earlier work on erotics. He's taking from vernacular poetry, and from the tradition of poetics, he's most likely drawing on Rudra Bhatta's The Ornament of Passion, which is an 11th century work on aesthetics. And when I say poetics, I mean the theories and principles of writing poetry. It's a template that poets followed. It's a way of understanding how pleasure is conveyed through poetry, through words, on paper. And he's also drawing on ideas and practices from yoga. Harihara demonstrates his awareness of past ideas and his conscious reflection on what counts as new, or at least what newness ought to look like. He positioned himself as having something fresh to contribute to the discourse of erotic pleasure, as so many PhD students, candidates, they thrive to do. They have something fresh to say after the literature review on the discourse of erotics and its cultivation. Comparing it with earlier works reveal at least 2 main interventions. First, a poeticized expression of eroticism, and second, a rethinking of erotic bodies through yogic practices. The marriage of erotics and poetics mark a crucial turning point in the history of erotics in the early second millennium. To give you an example, Harihara uses a threefold classification of men's and women's performance from poetics in his text to define or to describe or prescribe behaviors during lovemaking. I really wish, Rachel, it was a performance and I could have shown you how these performances happened in poetry, in songs, and then how it's translating into erotics. So Harihara uses these poetic conventions to reimagine real-world pleasure. In other words, erotic sentiment shifts from the page, from the paper, to the bed. And this is what I called the poeticized expression of eroticism. And he's using three categories of female and three categories of male lovers: innocent, somewhat experienced and expert in female lovers, and gentle, playful, and bold in male lovers. Another form of cross-cultural interaction in his text occurs between erotics and yoga. The expansion of sexual postures to 84 makes his text stand out within the Sanskrit erotic tradition, for earlier texts listed far fewer. Particularly compelling are his choices of the number 84 and his use of the term bandha, which literally means lock or bind, to describe sexual postures. Both the number and the term are central in medieval yogic traditions and suggests his engagement with them. Around the 13th century, yogic texts began to construct a rhetoric of 8.4 million yogic postures, 84 lakh asana or 84 lakhs asana postures, increasingly emphasizing their divine origins. The number 84 came to symbolize completeness and sacredness. Similarly, the term bandha is a technical term in yoga referring to bodily locks or constrictions used in practices, especially hatha yoga practices. So when Harihara uses both the number and the vocabulary, it suggests that he was in conversation with the yogic world of his time. In doing so, he reimagined sexual postures through yogic conceptions of the body. At present, we do not have enough textual evidence to determine whether Harihara directly borrowed from a specific yoga text. At the very least, however, we can speculate that such exchanges occurred rhizomatically through broader religious and cultural currents rather than a single line of influence. It is quite possible that other traditions of physical practices circulated in early medieval South Asia that influenced both erotics and ascetic domains, but left no written records. So to conclude my analysis of Harihara's lamp that eliminates passion, I show that Harihara rethinks erotics, that is, ways of performing and pursuing pleasure through the shifting terminology and technologies of his time. Perhaps he found the 3rd century Kama Sutra, long seen as the authority on the topic, outdated, and thus turned to newer ideals and practices outside the domain of erotics. And it is precisely these intertextual exchanges, cross-domain dialogues, that constitute the very tradition of pre-modern erotics. Today, we know of more than 30 published Sanskrit works on erotics, many more than I could fit in this table. I'm sure you won't be able to see it. But beyond these, there is a far, far larger list of more than 100 unpublished manuscripts scattered across archives in India and Nepal, as well as beyond South Asia, which I compiled during my archival research. I struggle with this word. My archival research to better map the breadth and persistence of South Asian erotics. And these are only Sanskrit works. There is another long list of texts on erotics in other South Asian languages, in Persian and Arabic. If we were to add these works, which indeed is my goal for future scholarship, I hope you will get to read my monograph someday, the picture would become even more complex. So when I introduce myself, I say I make sex boring. This is what I do. That's how I make it boring. So when I say trust me, please trust me. And not to mention, the world of pleasure extends beyond text into paintings, sculpture, and other form of material culture. All of this suggests that the intellectual history of pleasure is far richer and far less explored than we have so far imagined. And I leave you with this thought. और मैं अपनी वाणी को यहाँ विराम देता हूँ. I stop here and thank you. Thank you. Hello, Cynthia.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Milton. I'm the director for the Center for Global Studies. It has been an absolute pleasure to have Shubham among us. And I am sure that my colleagues at the Center for Religion and Society and CAPI, we all share the delight of having you among us.
I am delighted and I am honored.
So I'm going to start the ball rolling with a question. And I want to start my question or observation with an apology. So I come from a different traditional thought. And so reaching out to your topic, I'm rooted in my own historiography and my own training. And so I'm going to date myself here. And I'm clearing the cobwebs out of my brain, going back to graduate school. And I keep thinking of Foucault, Michel Foucault, right? And so he's writing on Victorian England, and he's coming to the conclusion that we can understand how power is made manifest, how power as a capillary thing that is everywhere at all time is made manifest when we look at sex, and we look at how sex is suppressed in Victorian Europe, in Victorian England. But while it's being suppressed, we can't stop talking about it. So
it makes it more
talkable. Exactly. And so the parameters of what is normal and what is allowed is defined, and what is allowed to be spoken of or not spoken of is defined. And then he can trace how that changes through time. So he does an intellectual, he does intellectual history of sexuality, right? Thus bringing us up to, and so one of the things he points to, for instance, is the difference between the way men and women are perceived, what they're allowed, what they're not allowed. And this sort of echoes with your talk. And I'm wondering, how does Foucault help you or not help you? How is what he's doing as a genealogy of sexuality echo or not echo with your intellectual history of Kama Sutra from, say, the 4th century to the 15th century? And does Foucault help you, or is Foucault more a hindrance because he's looking at such a completely different landscape? So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Fascinating questions, fascinating thoughts. Yes, Foucault is helping me so much that I introduce Foucault as my beloved. So not to mention I'm dedicating my dissertation to Foucault too. But so to answer your question, what I understand, especially in volume 2 of the history of sexuality, there are 4 volumes. In second volume, he says that I'm interested in studying how he's basically doing an institutional history, how we experience sex and how different institutions, whether it's medicine, whether it's prison, whether it's school, whether it's hospital, how we came to understand sex, how we experience sex. So it's a history of experience, I would say, per se, or genealogy of experiences of experiencing sexuality, not intellectual history per se. That's my reading, and it could be a limited. And in my work, I would say, or in general, in study of sexuality, Foucault is a major point to land on because it gives us theoretical terminologies, those languages to think about, discourses, repression and suppression. And when I'm bringing this work out, it's basically in conversation in Foucault's history of experiencing sexuality in a way that we are moving away from Victorian era, and we are thinking what other diverse ways of thinking about sexuality were there, not just modern or early modern, but pre-modern. Because everybody, since people have babies. Yeah. Thank you. That's the most polite way of putting it. I was thinking of something else. Sorry. Since people are having babies, the point is, How do they experience the project of making babies? So yes, Foucault, in one word, I would say Foucault is helping me. He's giving me, or he gave all of us that theoretical lens to look. And then we can expand on it, critique it. We can be in dialogue with Foucault. Actually, that's what I'm doing. Like, as we literature reviewers, they are in conversation with other predecessors or senior scholars who have long passed. I'm doing the same way, like how these authors, they are in conversation with each other. They are temporarily apart, like 4th century and then 11th century, and exactly how they are taking theories and how they have diverse ways of thinking about sexuality and pleasure and erotics. So yeah, thank you.
Questions. So, Apollo, yeah.
Kalpana.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kalpana.
Can you just wait 1 second till the mic comes from for the Zoom audience? Thank you. Turn the mic on. Hold the red button
on. Thank you, Shubham, for your talk. It was really wonderful. Maybe this is not even a question, it's a critique, because this is so heavily male realm of understanding pleasure and sex. So, and also, like, if you go to your the place where you define male and female as, yes. So is this the male interpretation of female lovers then, explicitly? Like,
Yes.
have you found innocent, somewhat experienced expert? Oh my God. It's like so problematic. Also, have you found any work at all done by women on this subject, or at least in your many manuscripts that you found, or any interpretation at all from a woman's perspective? Forget feminist perspective, I'm not even getting there. Is there a woman author, anybody that's working on this subject, and has anything of all this been challenged? Because this is so male dominant, heavy intellectualization of pleasure and sexuality, as I understand your talk. So
I know.
Thank you.
And I acknowledge that. And thank you so much for being here. I love this author critic meet when they come and they read or comment. First of all, yes. I haven't come across any work or any manuscript or any text written by a woman. The thing is, the domain of knowledge production in South Asia, as you would know, it was mainly Brahmin men dominated, and women were not allowed to participate in that. Okay, allowed is again a problematic term, and scholars can challenge me, and I'm happy to be challenged on that. There might be some work which could be written by women, but they are taking pseudonyms. So we don't know that, because so far, if you are going by the grammar or the language, you would see saha vatsyayanaha. So the ending is telling you that they are men. So say it again. Okay. Yeah. So saha vatsyayana means he is Vatsyayana, or Vatsyayana is writing, and Vatsyayana is man. There's a reading, scholarly reading, where a scholar says Padma Shri could be a woman, because it's long ending Padma Shri, which is used for women. Even he is a man, right? Yeah. So no, I haven't come across any text written by a woman. That's why I'm saying that when men theorize innocence and somewhat experience and expertness of women, I question, and please help me, Cynthia, to make it more polite and politically correct. What do men know about women's behavior? So we need a feminist reading probably there, like how women would interpret it. And now, as you said, these are highly problematic terms. From our modern standard, they're absolutely problematic terms. But in 14th century, in 13th century, why Harihara was thinking in that way? What made him think? Right. And so how male and female lovers, they are expected to behave, whether it's in poetry, whether it's on theater, on stage, or page, or bed. Yeah, so I get your point, but no, I haven't come across any text.
More questions
Yeah,
for you.
please.
So Pooja and then Paul. Pooja, right?
Oh, thanks. I want to start by apologizing for I have an allergic thing going on in my throat, so if I lose my voice, but I just wanted to pick up on your earlier conversation with Cynthia and the discussion about Foucault. I'm really curious to know in what ways you're engaging with, because part of what I see in this work, you talked about how one of the things that your work does is it disorients Asia as a site of pleasure. I think it also has the potential of disorienting Asia as sort of the field where the theory comes from somewhere else and is applied to understand things in Asia, right? So there's definitely a lot of potential here for that. So in that context, I'm curious about, and I say this by first acknowledging that the intellectual debts we all owe Foucault, and certainly, so I want to acknowledge that, but also I'm curious about interpreting these texts via Foucault, like in what ways, because I think you're doing something that's much more than that. And obviously a talk is not the place to play out all your methodology and theoretical framework. So I'd be curious to hear more about that, if you can share some more.
Foucault is completely a coffee talk. I would take you out on coffee and we'll chat about Foucault all day. But to answer your question quickly over here, as I said to Cynthia too, Foucault is giving us theoretical framework. We are getting these terminologies, these ideas from Foucault, how he studied Victorian era suppression of or experience of sexuality. But I'm not directly doing a Foucauldian study of, say, Kama Sutra or Harihara's text. That's not my project. That would rather be, as you said, would be injustice to Asian traditions for themselves. When I'm saying that I want to hear these voices on their own terms, that's fine. Like I'm listening to their grammar, their sentence structures, what the text is saying in their own context. But at the same time, in order to translate it for audience right now in academy, sometimes we use this word sexuality. The first question, is sexuality the right word? Maybe scholars, these authors, my bad. These authors never thought of sexuality as in gender. The gender is another term. Are we okay with using gender in work? Pleasure is another English term. My broader question or critique would be here, why we are speaking English? No, just don't take me wrong. Like, can language do justice? So if I'm saying I'm taking Foucauldian's this theoretical framework history of sexuality in my work, I'm adapting it to what these authors are saying. I'm not giving them Foucauldian voice, or I'm not putting voice in their mouths. I'm listening to them, but I'm very cognizant of not to hinder these authors' voices, because that would be not fair. It would be unfair. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Shubham.
Thanks,
I'm
Paul.
so happy to have you back with us this year. I'm really interested. I mean, one of the justifications for having you shared by all three centers is that we're kind of curious about the way some of these ideas and practices and texts travel through time and space, right? So linking Asia and North America. So I'm very glad you started with looking at the way the Kama Sutra is kind of rendered in or taken up by popular culture.
Right.
So all the interest in the Kama Sutra, but also all the interest in Tantra. And it seems to me that in those kind of contemporary erotics, you have this idea that sexual pleasure can be used for spiritual advancement. And I'm wondering if you see, if that line is kind of imagined or kind of orientalized in the West, is it present in these texts? Because your last lecture that you gave at the center maybe last year was really about some of the mechanics in the most kind of crude sense, the mechanics of sexual activities and how it's policed and theorized and so on. So is this idea that sex can be a kind of a vehicle for enlightenment also present here in an explicit way that the modern tantric manuals always imagine it to be?
So there are so many questions in this. I'll start with one precise answer: yes. So there is this text which is still in manuscript, and I have not included it in. It's almost 16th, 17th century text. It's called Ayurveda Prakasha, the light on Ayurveda. and it's all about Kama Sutra. And rather that author who is writing it, we don't know who the author is, but they are taking verses from these 3 texts primarily. And there it says that Kama, pleasure, is a way to Vairagya. Vairagya means detachment, and from there, Mukti, which is liberation. So yes, we see these thin lines, thin ideas there, but we still need to, that's why I'm saying there is lots of work here that needs to be done, that we need to bring out this knowledge, these ideas out, and see how they travel, or their genealogies, as Cynthia said in the beginning, how the idea of liberation and sexuality, or liberation and pleasure, Kama, is changed in the 16th or 17th century. Before that, people were interested in aesthetic sentiments, emotions, how people are portraying them on bed or on paper or on stage. And before that, it was, which I presented in my earlier lecture, how Vatsyayana is in dialogue with other scholars, and it's like how these scholars are debating. It's like a form of Shastrartha, where these scholars, these authors in 4th century meeting, and they're debating who experiences pleasure in what way and how not. So yeah, there are so many ways to take this idea. But thanks for the question.
I've seen 4 questions, and I think if I do this right, we can maybe get all 4 questions in.
Right.
Okay. So the gentleman in the, sorry. We have 4 questions, 4 hands. So the gentleman in the front, and then the woman in the back, and then I'll find you in the middle, and then your hand here. Okay, great. That's the 4. My apologies to those.
Nice and easy.
Yeah. I think this, you have this, what's that?
Right.
300 C.
Right. Sorry.
Then you have a millennium islands.
Right. Right.
And then suddenly you have maybe 100 or 200 years, again, an eruption.
Right.
On defining this.
Right.
You have any views or
any explanation? Yes, I do have an explanation. The simplest explanation is the text didn't survive. The text, because of weather, because of climatic conditions, they didn't survive. The earliest available text in the 2nd millennium is Padma Shri's text, or Kakokas. They're roughly around that time period. But that doesn't mean people were not writing about it. We get some snapshots or some references to earlier scholars whose work is not surviving, or whose work hasn't survived yet. So to answer your questions, the gap is there because we don't have any text, but does that mean people were not thinking for 1 millennium? Like now we have Kama Sutra and will not think about it? That's unlikely. That's unreasonable for me, I would say. So yeah, it's more of a, as I said, we don't have enough textual evidence.
Hi, Shubham. Thank you. That was wonderful. When you were reading these texts, compiling them, and then analyzing them, did you find anything that surprised you?
That surprised me. I mean, all of it, not just me, my partner too. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. Where should I start? Okay, I'll give you one example, and then after this talk, we'll discuss more examples. In the 2nd book, Padma Shri's Everything an Urban Gentleman Needs to Know, and that's something I'm theorizing. In the last chapter, 38, there are 38 chapters, and in the last chapter, Padma Shri is saying that in order to get a son, to conceive a son, a couple should, if a couple is a Buddhist believer or follower, they should donate to monasteries and bhikshus, Buddhist monks. And if they are a Brahmin believer, like a Brahmin follower or Hindu, they should donate to Brahmins, and they should worship Shiva and Parvati, who are Hindu pantheon. And I was thinking this question, how this author is using sex, not just for pleasure. The telos is not pleasure anymore, it's procreation, because that's the last chapter. And there is this hidden motive is not the right word, but I don't have a better word right now. I would say further intentions to support the communities, to support the religious communities. How pleasure can be used and mobilized in that way, that's something I was fascinated about. And I know that's a boring example, but I was fascinated. I'm happy to discuss further examples.
Yeah,
Hi, Francis.
hi. Well, that was simply lovely. I was wondering, and you know where I'm coming from, I'm wondering about the role of the imagination
Oh, yeah.
in these texts.
Right.
And as I say, you know where I'm coming from.
I know where you're coming from. You imagine quite a lot. I can tell. So what's your question? The role of the imagination. Okay, so I'm on the right slide here. This idea of erotic arousal, which is abhimaniki in Sanskrit, it's how a man thinks of himself, how a man imagines himself, and how a woman imagines himself. So how masculine and feminine archetypes, they imagine himself when they come together. In a private setting. So this erotic arousal is the key for imagination. The term rather is abhimaniki, sometimes it's sankalpa, which Shulman has also used, the idea of sankalpa, imagination. So there is, I mean, without these texts, I can say there's lots of imagination and fantasies that go in our head. We don't need texts for that. So imagination has a great role. Yes, sorry, yes.
Thank you for a really wonderful lecture to give intellectual depth to such a complicated and misunderstood topic.
Love to have you here, Catherine.
It takes a lot of expertise to do that. But I was struck toward the end that you tantalized us with the idea of art and architecture being related. And I immediately thought that you are a dancer and dance must have this connection too.
Absolutely.
And is that something you're going to write about in the future?
Yes, there is. Okay, so given the precarity of academia, I'm thinking of so many paths, like almost 150 I can count on my fingers. One is critical dance studies. And in critical dance studies, there are scholars I'm in touch with. We are thinking of translating and performing these poetry, these erotic poetries, without giving the essence. The idea of these poetry is not the explicitness. It's the subtlety. How she looks and how he's looking at her. It's the joy that he's not touching her, she's not being touched by him, but the gaze is touched and they are in conversation. That's the subtlety we are thinking of translating. So Catherine, thank you so much for bringing that question. And probably my postdoc or my another fellowship with Rachel would be in critical dance studies here, where I'm translating these poetries and these poems and performing.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time, but I do encourage you all to reach out to. Oh, sorry. Yes.
I got it. The next.
Oh, great. Thank you. So, thank you. So please do stay. Talk to Shubham if you have more questions. Sorry, we couldn't field them all.
All intellectual questions, please.
Yeah.
No advice. I'm no sex curator.
And so the next talk coming up for the Center for the Study of Religion and Society is Hidden Heritage, Decorated Qurans from Coastal East Africa, and that'll be on March 19th from 5 to 6:15. Thank you all so much for coming here in great numbers, and again, a round of applause for Shubham.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much. Nobody cheered this me ever. Thank you. It means a lot. And Rachel, we should start a Kama Sutra reading at center too in juxtaposition to Yoga Sutra. I'm serious. Thanks, my friend.